It's always good to get a little bit of good news in. And we don't talk about good news out of Europe, especially. I feel like if we're talking about something in Europe, it is typically some horrible thing happening in the UK. Just usually. Like for a channel that focuses on trans related issues, we got a lot of bad stories out of the UK. However, we have a nice story out of Germany right now. Different countries and even sometimes different states, like in the United States, each different state has different requirements for what you have to do in order to get your documentation updated. Like, are you even allowed to change the sex on your birth certificate or on your driver's license? And if you are, what is required for you to be able to do that? Do you, in some places, have to provide proof of some kind, or at least a doctor has to testify basically that you had some kind of surgery? Some places require you to have a surgery specifically that sterilizes you. Some places it's just like, have you undergone a nebulous but quote sufficient amount of gender affirming care? And there are some places in the United States and increasingly elsewhere that this is a great way to start a segment that are increasingly letting people just pick what their legal sex and gender shows up as on their paperwork, which is really cool. We want to see that because we want, frankly, it's kind of uncool that we demand that trans people normalize their bodies to an extent before we'll let them have identification that matches their appearance. You know, that some places require you to have, like I said, like a sterilizing surgery. So if you're a trans woman, you have to have your testicles removed. And if you're a trans man, then yeah, you would need to have like a hysterectomy or something else similar to that. Which of course is like pretty sus, trying to reduce births within the group, are we? But it's normalizing as well. You can't be legally female if you're still capable of getting someone pregnant. How would that work? We would have to put you down as the father on the birth certificate. That would be weird. You know, like they come up with reasons why it's, so complicated and, we need barriers in place. It's always cisgender gatekeepers. It's always non-trans people in these positions of authority and influence who are saying, you need to prove to me, or you need to meet some weird arbitrary in order to change these legal documentations. And that's, like I said, assuming that they even let you change them. I live in Kansas, and they just declared in the courts that we don't have the right to accurate gender identity on our documentation. Like, it's okay and even necessary, apparently, for trans people to be forced out of the closet anytime we need to apply for a job or like try to get a new apartment. You know, if your information comes up and it doesn't match your appearance, the likelihood that you're going to get denied service increases, and we are now marking trans people kind of like they did in Nazi Germany. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, maybe subscribe, hit all notifications if you want. Feel free to check out the links in the description. You might find some merch you like, or you can hit up the Patreon to support the content and find free stuff. So speaking of Germany, you know, it used to be back in the day during the government that preceded the Nazi takeover of Germany, which is now called the Weimar Republic. I recently learned that that was actually sort of the disparaging terminology that the Nazis were using to describe the previous government. Interesting that that's now just what we call it. But they had this program basically where you could get basically medical clearance to cross-dress. Like cross-dressing wasn't legally permitted at the time, and you would need a little medical card that would say, if the police accosted you, this card says, I have a mental health diagnosis basically that says I'm allowed to dress this way. And that has shifted and changed over time to, apparently in 1980, there was a law in Germany called the Transsexual Law, which required trans people to provide a local court with two, quote, expert reports attesting to a, quote, high degree of probability that the applicant will not want to revert to their previous legal gender. I don't really see why that's necessary. You can just revert it back. Like, just make the process easy to do either way, and why would it matter? But apparently the German Constitutional Court has previously struck down other draconian aspects of the law, including requiring surgery to get gender recognition. So they've already kind of been striking down various things about this law over time. So apparently Germany is now completely abolishing any pathologizing requirements for gender recognition. So there's now going to be a new law that says, yo, you can just self-declare. It's called self-ID. When people are trying to scaremonger about this, it's called self-ID. You'll see TERFs in the UK basically saying like, we can't have self-ID, it's dangerous. If you let people self-ID, then they will be able to enter women's spaces and blah, 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 blah. And when we're talking about changing your legal documentation, we're talking about changing, like, not even your passport, not your day-to-day ID, but your, like, government ID, the thing that shows up on your birth certificate, on your death certificate, on your marriage license. So having self-ID for those things doesn't change whether or not trans people have access to bathrooms, for example, because it was never the law in the UK that you needed to change your gender recognition certificate thing. You don't need to provide a copy of your birth certificate or any ID in order to gain access to a bathroom. You simply are not required to have it. So having self-ID doesn't materially who's using which spaces. It tends to be for the kind of identity documentation that would out you, or that would be like, if you're a trans woman in the UK and you don't have a gender recognition certificate, like if you haven't medically transitioned because the NHS is effectively not taking new patients who are trans, and like, et cetera, all this stuff is like preventing you from being able to change your gender recognition certificate stuff, then if you get married, you're going to be listed as the husband or a husband on the thing. Like, yeah, most people will put off getting married because they don't want to be listed as literally like, oh, you're the groom, you're the husband, legally speaking, on this paperwork, you know? Which, of course, that's a problem that could be solved by just putting spouse instead of husband or wife, but whatever. We have to unnecessarily gender things at every conceptual level of society. Don't worry about it. It's also pretty cool and worth mentioning about this law that's changing in Germany is that not only are there going to be no expert opinions or medical certificates required to change your identity documentation, but you will also be able to choose from several gender markers, male, female, or quote, diverse, and you can opt not to enter a gender at all. And like, that's pretty cool because a lot of places in my country of the United States of America, for example, you can, or you used to be able to change your legal sex on your documentation in Kansas, but you couldn't change it to an X. Like, it just, like, non-binary or X was not an option. Even for children born intersex, I don't think we have it's like not built into our computer systems and stuff. And imagine being able to opt out of listing your gender at all. Like, I don't think that makes it more difficult to collect information about individuals in society, which is one of the things that is claimed about why they took away the right to change your legal sex in Kansas, is like, oh, for the purposes of collecting information about the public, apparently we need to know what your, like, genitals were when you were born. That's really important for us to know. Yeah, so it's cool for Germany to be doing this because in the context of everything else that's been going on, like speaking to the, bringing up the UK and TERFs and everything, in America and in Britain, they keep invoking, oh, this other European country, oh, this Danish clinic closed. Maybe we should think like them. Oh, this new report came out that said there might be more regret than we thought there was. Like, they're constantly looking for something to validate them scientifically, or they look to other countries and say, oh, well, wow, these left-leaning progressive countries are actually putting a stop to youth transition care. So, ooh, that must mean that there's something wrong with it. We should stop doing it as well. So in the midst of all that happening, it is really cool to be able to point to Germany and go, hey, look, Germany is once again kind of leading Europe in the way that it was sort of leading Europe. Like, Berlin in the Weimar Republic was bumping. It was like one of the destinations in Europe for if you were trans or if you were gay. Like, it was bumping, like, healthy LGBTQ community. There's a reason why Magnus Hirschfeld established the Sexual Institute there. It was because there was this existing culture, right? So this is not the first time even that Germany has been a leader in Europe for accepting trans people, for changing laws in a way that makes it more accepting, more possible for us to live our lives. Like, I don't know if you guys realize this, but in Germany, and I used to follow a couple of German trans guys. I don't know if I unfollowed them at some point, but one of them at least identified as non-binary, but was basically having to hide that completely during the process of seeking healthcare on the National Healthcare Service. Because the way that the diagnostic criteria and stuff were written at the time, and I don't know if this has changed, I haven't checked, but basically they were not treating people who were non-binary. You basically had to just claim that you were binary in order to get your surgery or your hormones that you needed. So it's another positive change that if you are in Germany, like the fact that they have the diverse option, I don't know what the actual word is in German that they're using for that. Like, that's a catch-all for like non-binary or whatever. That might mean that they're also opening up a bit and, not forcing people to have a binary transition. Like, because I think that they also, lots of countries do that thing where it's like, if you're getting national health care, you have to be on hormones before you can get any surgery. And there are some trans people, especially non-binary people, who don't want to be on testosterone and they just want top surgery. So again, it would be great if we weren't trying to forcibly normalize trans people, if we could embrace the gender diversity and accept that, yeah, like sometimes people want to be non-normative, like that we shouldn't be trying to force people. Yeah, and of course it's excellent for intersex people too, that, if there's a legal option for them as well, then there's no reason to forcibly normalize them as well. Diversity in this economy. So just a little bit of news that I wanted to cover, a little bit of positive news, like mad hypes for everybody who lives in Germany, like hypers in chat. For Germany, at least making steps in the right direction. It's not perfect. There might still be those constraints on the healthcare service where maybe there are still problematic requirements and everything, so it's not perfect. There is still a contingent of sort of neo-Nazi-ish type people in Germany, even though they crack down on that stuff a lot more. So while we can acknowledge that you can always be doing more to protect trans people, right? Obviously, we live in a world that is very unsafe for us. There is like no shortage of actions you could take to make life better for trans people, to increase our safety, to increase our dignity. But there are improvements happening. The entire world is not against us. I think that that's like the main takeaway, is it can feel, especially like I live in a conservative state in the United States, like you don't feel particularly welcome, even if you see other people like you in public. Like it's not like a good sensation, And to know that if I were to travel to another country, it would be the same way. If I were to try to move to, so-and-so, whatever, if I tried to move to the UK, why would anybody do that? I don't know, but, it's just nice to be able to say, at least in Germany, if you moved there and you got identification there, you could self-declare your gender and you would have the option basically to choose the X, which would be cool. Thank you, my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvag, Amanda B., Michelle Frateroli, Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, Suzanne Maynard, DZXN, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Ella V. Nobody, Pasnell Infinity, Jamie Jam, Sojo, Nova, Elizabeth Bartell, Athiet, Kevin Young, Desi Quiche, Celeste, Liam Hodgson, and Mr. Atheist.